Okay, so this is the final day of our Extravaganza education event here in Vocology in Practice, and I'm super excited about this day. We're going to start with Chadley, who's going to bring you've read some of the articles already, I think, and it's just mind-blowing to kind of re-appreciate and understand everything we know about how Twang works and what can we do about it. So we're going to have both Chadley and Carrie help us understand that today. And I'm really excited. Chadley, I'm going to be really happy if you tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know you've done so much, but I want everyone else to get to know you
Yeah,
as well. So thank you for being here.
it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm a little under the weather myself, but so I'm getting over some laryngitis, so I'm a little extra low today. My name is Chadley Ballantyne. I am an assistant professor of music voice at Stetson University in Florida. This is my second year here. Before that, I was at University of Northern Colorado for a year, teaching in the classical program there. And for about 8 or 9 years prior to that, I was in the Chicago area teaching classical voice, musical theater voice, rock singing, at a number of programs, including Roosevelt University in the Theater Conservatory and North Park in the Music and Worship program, working with young, like basic rock technique for young singers there. I've had a lot of fun working closely with Ken Bozeman and Ian Howell. Ken Bozeman's retired from Lawrence, and Ian Howell's at New England Conservatory, and together we teach a a summer acoustic acoustic voice pedagogy workshop at New England Conservatory, and we're really looking forward to our third summer coming up this in 2020. My background is in classical singing, and in my doctoral studies, I got really interested in how to understand vocal technique through acoustics, and that really led me on this really fun journey of looking into what we can learn from acoustic signals about different singing styles, and what is it in the signal that affects our perception of the voice and the singing style and the singing technique and the person singing. So I've had a lot of fun going after how to maximize the things in contemporary styles of singing and in classical styles of singing that really kind of define the styles and bring the power of the styles to it. So my article was kind of looking very specifically at trying to set some parameters for ring and twang. These words have a lot of different usages. I tried to stick kind of closely to the way Ingo Tietze used it in one of his articles, and to just kind of look at ring as something that kind of happens in the 2,000 to 4,000 hertz range, and twang being high frequency energy above there. So I've got some slides that I'll share, and then some musical examples as well. And today's talk, kind of building off of that exploration of some different recordings in the articles, is more about the teaching side and the perception side. So I get my PowerPoint going. Okay. So this is teaching twang, the low, the high, and the buzzy. And when we talk about buzzy, there's the mechanical sound waves that we experience as listeners and as singers, and we can experience those as tactile buzzing or auditory roughness, depending on their frequency range. So I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the times the roughness and the intensity in the sounds that we're hearing are actually defined by the high frequency energy, especially when we're talking about something like mixed belt. It's defined by its higher frequencies rather than its lowest frequency. And that was something that really shocked me when I started to get the hang of that some years ago, that the lowest frequency, the very lowest frequency, never sounds like belt, and that it's all the energy above there that kind of defines whether or not it's going to sound belty or mixed or just sound like more of a classical head voice. And when I've been working with singers, one of the challenges is overcoming this expectation that intense singing styles should hurt or that they should feel heavy in the chest, that they're expecting it to feel like their speaking voice when it's all of them kind of sit higher than the speaking voice. And because of that, they don't feel like the speaking voice. And because of the high frequency energy defining it, it's going to feel very different. So, so what I strive to do is teach singers how to take advantage of auditory roughness, kind of take advantage of the acoustic skill of different singing styles. So we've got kind of three areas that we can listen for in a sound. The lower harmonics within the signal, harmonics 1 through 5, will tend to have a pure quality to them with very little roughness or buzz. If the first if the fundamental is the strongest, that's going to give it a much more kind of round, kind of heady sound. Ironically, the classical soprano singing is defined by its lowest harmonic, and the low classical bass is defined by its higher harmonics. So it's kind of the opposite of what we expect in far as like our concepts of location. The next bandwidth going up tends to, depending on the range you're singing in, but if we're talking about mix and belt, it's usually going to fall with somewhere around harmonics 6 through 9. Those harmonics tend to have a ringing quality that still resolves into the pitch in our perception. It will have a little bit of buzz to it, some roughness, but it'll still kind of convey some of the pitch information. And for singing techniques, we're especially interested in which harmonics are strong in the range of 2,000 to 4,000 hertz. That's where we get our famous singers formant cluster is showing up somewhere in that bandwidth usually. Then an area that is often underrepresented in our discussions on acoustics is above 5,000 hertz. And I think that has something to do with traditionally focusing in on 5,000 hertz and below. And in fact, the default setting for most for Voce Vista Pro and Voce Vista Video is about 5,000 hertz. And so if we expand that range, we can see a whole bunch of information that it actually does have quite a big impact on what the sound seems like to us, the identity of the person speaking. And that area, using Tietz's language for this, there are certainly some different uses of these terms, but that twang is, for this talk, twang is really looking at that energy above 5,000 hertz. And it's usually higher than the 9th harmonic. If it's a very high soprano, it might be a lower harmonic, but for mix and belt, it's usually going to be above the 9th harmonic. And once we get up into those like 9, 10 and above in the harmonics, we're going to get a lot more auditory roughness and buzz and less resolution into the pitch. If we isolate those out, they won't really have any pitch information for us. So I want to give some examples of that. Let me switch to a different screen to share. Okay, so these are some examples of my singing, doing some different resonance strategies in my own voice on the same note. I recorded these a while back, and the idea is I'm singing an F4 in several different styles and resonance characteristics. First one's in a classical style. Second one's kind of in a belt. It's a little bit more the yell strategy of the first resonance tuned into the second harmonic to make a really strong second harmonic. The third one is a little bit more of a rock. It's kind of similar to the belting, but the big difference between the classical and the rock is that the formants are really evenly spaced for rock singing. They tend to, instead of clustering into groups, they tend to be kind of equally spaced throughout. And we keep getting more and more high frequency energy above 5,000 hertz. These are a little bit older. Nowadays, when I'm working on this stuff, I'm getting high frequency energy up past 8,000 hertz, but not today with my froggy voice. This is an example of adding an extra layer of roughness by allowing the false folds to come into contact on that same note. And then as far as our spectrum analysis goes, it essentially adds another set of harmonics. So it adds this weird distortion of what octave the pitch is in. And then adding some more buzzy things in the throat, probably like some arytenoid buzz, but I don't have my own scope to check to see exactly what I did there, except it was fun. So coming back to this classical example here at the start, we can really kind of pull out two big bands. So from the chart of pure, ring, and twang, the whole thing together sounds like this. And if I go in and separate out the bottom 5 harmonics, this is going to have a bit more, this is where the purity is. And if I go down to just the bottom harmonic, the fundamental, there's very little roughness at all. It just kind of sounds like a, ugh. If I expand this back out and isolate this bandwidth here, where the singer's formant cluster is, we're going to get some roughness, but still resolving pretty much into the pitch, which so we'll get a little bit of pitch information, some auditory roughness, but not a ton, but some ringing. And our ears are very good at hearing those sounds. That just rang in my head when I played that. And up here, because it's classical, there's not a whole lot going on up here, but there's a little bit. So this is getting up into where we're up into that twang part. I'm going to take a step over here to a little bit more of a first resonance, second harmonic belt approach to that note. And even though that sounds quite a bit different, the fundamental still has that same pure sound. I can't turn that into a sound that sounds belted. If I just have the bottom, some cool stuff. That area is a little bit higher in this because the tube's a little shorter. The ringy part. And then the high stuff above 5,000. And if I loop it and bring it back all together, you need all of it. Then in this style, I'm going to have even less focus in this area. The resonance of the vocal tracks are a little bit more spread out. Whoa! Whoa! Get rid of my loop. And again, that bottom part is still going to have a lot of kind of a pure quality to it. Whoa! But this one has quite a bit more twang. Then if I add false folds, so without and then with. Whoa! Whoa! That adds a whole another level of grit that is perfectly comfortable and fine, not desirable for classical singing and used not all that often in rock singing, but some rock singers use it quite a bit. Then here's some arytenoid buzzing just for fun. And it started out with a little bit of a whoop timbre there, where I'm really just bringing out the purity sound. and then switching the articulation to bring out twang, and then eventually bring out the higher frequency energy, and then add some noise to within the vocal tract. And then this one is going from that whoop quality, that kind of very pure, focusing on the fundamental, to lots of distortion. Okay, so one of the challenges that I've faced as a teacher is convince students who are working on, especially belt and rock singing, that it doesn't have to be, that it's not the same thing as just taking their chest voice all the way to the top. This roadmap here was inspired especially by the article by Titsa, the mammalian larynx. I think it was 2017, the human speech, the restricted use of the mammalian larynx. And it summed up quite a bit of research into this really great picture of like how speech is really wonderful, but also only uses like a small part of the capacity we have for vocalism. And in there, there's references to different studies that looked at the actual cricothyroid and thyroarytenoid activation levels throughout the range. And something that these studies, though there are not very many of them because they're very difficult and painful to do, but each one kind of noticed the same thing, that CT versus TA tends to be more pitch specific than technique specific. That it just seems to follow this continuum, no matter who it is, as long as it's an adult, and no matter what their training level or what style they're singing in. So that's different from our perception of a belted sound sounding TA dominant, when in fact the belting takes place in a pitch range that there might be TA activation, but it's doubtful, at least so far in the research, that it's actually TA dominant. It just might have an element of TA activation. That still needs more research on it. But I think as a teaching model, this is very helpful for teaching people how to effectively and efficiently mix and belt without getting in their own ways. Of looking at it as basically from E4, it's a thinner mechanism, it's CT dominant, but we can turn that into different modes of phonation. We can certainly take advantage of high frequency energy to really create the most powerful and effective versions of mix and belt. And that it's below E4 that we have that thicker mechanism. And then within this, there's this fun little subcategory in the traditional zona di passaggio of about A3 to E4. Below A3, the TA is dominant, the TA is carrying the tension of the pitch. And then once we start going past A3, the vocal ligament begins to take on tension of the pitch. And by the time we get to E4, the ligament is now carrying the tension of the pitch. But TA can no longer carry the tension because the vocal fold has to keep stretching and stretching and stretching, so it has to let go. It gets to a weak length, and then we have this amazing vocal ligament that strengthens with use, that takes over the tension pitch from E4 on up. That causes a sensation change within that the singer is having in their proprioception and their kinesthesia of the voice that is sometimes hard for them to overcome and accept that it feels different than they're expecting. So this roadmap is where I start for any adult singer who's working on this. I want to make sure that these big transitions are happening effectively and without restraint. So I'll briefly go through some of the semi-occluded exercises that I use to help people with this. Okay, there we go. So I like to use the semi-occluded exercises to really set these transition points. Because the semi-occluded sounds kind of cover up the transitions to the perception of the person singing them, so they're less likely to get in their own way. They also, that semi-occluded posture is favorable to the muscles of the larynx for actually making those switches freely. So we all, I'm sure, know about straw phonation. That one's a really useful one, although it brings out the physical sensations of that break so much that sometimes it's difficult for students to accept that that break is so prominent. Putting a straw in a glass of water and bubbling while you phonate tends to add another layer of masking so that the singers are less likely to be listening to themselves, and it's kind of an overwhelming experience, so they're not as worried about their own singing. Also, the variations in air pressure, supraglottic air pressure caused by the bubbles, encourage the vocal mechanism to go through those register changes. It's also a great way to work on persistent nasality. If you're singing through your nose, you're not going to get any bubbles. So with my students, when we work on this, we practice alternating humming and bubbling so we can feel that difference between nasal airflow and the soft palate then being in an up position, closing off that port. This one's also really good for helping to release kind of pressing and extra tension in the throat. This is one that I really like, and I didn't think to put a card in front of me, so I'll grab one. Oh, no, I have one here. So this is one I learned from Marianne Hart, and she said she learned it from a Nats teacher in Iowa a long time ago. And it's kind of like the Joseph Stemple Buzzy O sounds, but you hold like an index card or a lightweight business card up in front of your face, and you make a sound. So it's like you've got a very small embouchure and you're singing through your mouth. It's kind of a distorted sound. And if you hold the card into that stream, the card will start vibrating. And what I really like about that one is the attention on the skill of doing this buzzy sound, and then the buzzy sound being external and not really affected by registration. This one does a really great job of masking the laryngeal registration events as far as to the perception of the singer. So they're less likely to get to try to keep everything locked into one position. You can still feel those register transitions, but they're not nearly the traumatic, devastating experience as they are on just a straight vowel glide or even on the straw. So it really kind of de-emphasizes the sensation of the register change while still letting it be identifiable. So I found this one to be really helpful. A variation on this that has been I haven't found any research studies on this buzzy card, but a very similar one that has been researched is a finger kazoo. And that, instead of the card, you just take your finger and press it to your lips. I used to do it this way, but my students and I found that it's even more effective if you put your finger pad on your upper lip and you're just making a buzzy sound. So you can feel the airflow through your mouth. You can feel like the tactile vibrations of the sound on your finger. And again, it really facilitates an easy transition across E4, going from that TA, from the lower TA dominant, TA carrying the tension of the pitch, to the ligament, transferring over to the ligament, taking the pitch tension, and then eventually the cricothyroid muscle becoming the dominant one in that articulation of the pitch of the larynx. This one has had research study done on it, and finger kazoo, and in that article, they had found that finger kazoo was very effective for alleviating chronically pressed phonation. So I'm a big fan of it, and it doesn't take any props. So those are some of the semi-occluded exercises I do to set the stage for being able to add high frequency energy without pain or with a low amount of input in energy. So one thing to keep in mind as we're playing around with high frequency energy is when we talk about acoustics, a lot of times we read about it and look at it from the viewpoint of the observer. And to the observer, the vowels are defined by the formants. So a certain formant dispersion defines a vowel. If it's dispersed this way, that's an E. If it's dispersed this way, that's an ah. But for the singer, it's important that we look at it the opposite way, that the singer actually controls the formant dispersion through articulation. So for the singer or the speaker, it's the vowels that control the formants. It's the vowels that define the formant dispersion. So one exercise that I've used quite a bit to help develop ring, especially for my classical singers and for my belters, so that singer's formant cluster area, that bandwidth of 2,000 to 4,000 hertz, and to alleviate this tendency to try to press on the fundamental to get a belted sound, which will never get a belted sound, it'll just end up being pure. Is using a retroflex R as a teaching exercise, not to use heavily in performance, but to help students find articulation that brings out really effective vocal tract configurations and that really emphasizes the high frequency energy in their sound. In particular, I'm interested in helping people figure out how to use the second vocal tract resonance with a source harmonic to create an intense sound. In the article that I wrote, I noted that in general, it's actually kind of the exception to see a first formant on the second harmonic all the way through belting, that there aren't that many people that do it really. It's like a lot of the models for belt technique, especially the traditional models, really use more of a second resonance strategy, similar to a classical tenors. And that really, what's fun about that is that tends to create a darker, more chest-like sound, an earthier sound. And it's more flexible. You can make a lot of different vowel sounds on it. It's tricky to learn. It's less instinctual than the other one, but I've found that this R thing is really helpful for leading singers to it. So the second resonance strategy approach that tends to have a lot of ring in it, has a lot of different names depending on the style you're singing in. Sometimes we call it the mid-range for classical treble singers, or middle voice, or cover for classical baritones, or a mixed belt, or voce di testa in pie. Now that's fun. So here are a couple examples, in addition to the ones I included in the article, of two singers of the opposite styles using a second resonance strategy. So the second resonance on the second harmonic. And I differentiate between second resonance and second formant, because sometimes when we see these strategies, if we're being very technical and saying that the formant is the result in the spectrum, in the spectral envelope, we're really seeing this first peak, but as far as our articulation goes, that had to be the second resonance making that formant. So, but that resonance versus formant is still kind of a messy set of terminology. But this is Zinka Milanoff singing Caro Mio Ben, and using this strategy the second time the theme comes around, when she has an ah vowel on C sharp 5. Second strategy. And then, certainly not someone we usually think of in the same line as Zinka Milanoff, Ethel Merman singing Let Me Call You Sweetheart. And this is one of her earlier recordings where it's a little bit more lyrical, but she was using the same strategies here as she was using in the more belted, brassy belt example that I included in the article. And the moment that especially compares to Zinka Milanoff is at the end of this clip where she says, I'm in love with you. The I'm is ah on a C sharp 5 again, and we have a very prominent second harmonic being brought out by the second resonance. If it was the first resonance creating that coupling, it would have a totally different vowel sound to it and be quite intense, but this one is very lovely and legato and lyric. So
let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep the love light glowing in your eyes so true. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you.
So one of the things that sets these two samples apart is that Ethel Merman has a little bit more high frequency energy above, so going up into the 4,000 hertz range. She tends to have one more harmonic prominent up there, and unlike Milanoff, Merman uses this second resonance, second harmonic strategy almost the entire time. And Milanoff uses it only for these open vowels, kind of in the mid-range. So coming back to our R, because I've found that that second resonance strategy is really tricky to kind of pin down. And it's perhaps because we don't have the same kind of tactile awareness of that resonance as we do the first one. And I found that any time you can get resonances to move around, so you can see the formants moving in the spectrum, then that's useful. If you're just trying to hold them in one place, that tends to not be so interesting or useful. But if you can help a student learn how to move these around through articulation, then they can get a much better sense of it through that movement. So looking at this retroflex R, which there's a good reason we don't sing on it in performance hardly ever. There are a couple styles that feature it, but not that many. One reason is that it knocks out all the high frequency energy and kind of makes kind of an odd sound. So this is, again, not about learning how to sing R all the time while we're performing, but it's about using the R to learn the full range of our articulation and set up some really powerful acoustic results. So here's what this retroflex R looks like.
Eerie.
And I'll play that again. And what I want you to notice is that kind of unique to this sound, and also something we can see in MRIs of overtone singing. Now, there's kind of several, instead of one convergence of the tongue, there's two. And the tip of the tongue is also in motion too. We'll see a convergence in the mouth and down here at the epiglottis level.
Eerie.
And that's the frozen in time. So we have this double convergence of here at the epiglottis level, leaning the epiglottis back. Perhaps, as Carrie Obert has observed, perhaps playing a role in helping the narrowing of the epilarynx. And then we also have the convergence here. So we've got this really interesting situation where the sets up some of the conditions for ring right at this level. And we get a lot of movement. And it's amazing to me how most singers are worried about using the full range of motion of their tongue. They're trying, often what I'm helping them overcome is this feeling that they need to just lock their tongue into one position for all of singing, when actually it's kind of the most magical part of our whole instrument that can do all kinds of great stuff. And if it's free to move and play with the resonances of our vocal tract, then we can really get some different kinds of efficiency and power in the voice. And basically this R, like it's a one way of thinking of it is it's using the retroflex R to overshoot. If we go from E to R, we've basically covered the entire range of how the tongue can activate, and we can overshoot the mark and come back to it rather than just trying to hold our voice or hold our articulation to a mark we don't even know yet. So these are some stills of what that R looks like in motion. I'll try to demonstrate it live in my own voice, but I'm a little limited today. The first one here on the left is just, I've labeled where the formants are, so we don't see the resonances in the spectrum, but we do see what they've done to the harmonics, and those peaks we can see are the formants. So on the pattern of R, 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 we see the first formant not really moving all that much, the second formant not really moving that much, but the third formant is moving all over the place. And it kind of surprised me just how much it moved when I first started playing around with this idea a few years ago. I'd always been focused in on those first two formants in the spectrum. Those are the vowel formants. Those are the ones that are the movable ones. And I saw one morning getting ready for school, I saw a article title, the American R moves the third formant. And I thought, how much does it move it? So when I got to school, I opened up my computer and said R, and I saw that third formant drop like a rock. It's just as movable as the second one. So on the right, I've highlighted those in case you're new to like tracking the formant through the spectrum. I've highlighted the formants in red so we can kind of see their movement there. And that's ah to Then E to does something even cooler, really. Sundberg noted some time ago that when formants are near each other, they tend to boost each other. So if we just say E the first formant doesn't move all that much, just a little. And the second formant, because we're saying E, is in proximity to the third formant. And when we say E, 2 and 3 move together through the spectrum and get quite powerful. And you can see there in the moment of R, where it's 2 and 3 have dipped down low, that we've knocked out a bunch of high frequency energy. I would say that's one of the reasons we don't sing on very often, nor is it advisable. But that movement can really teach students about how to use their articulation, and it can start to build up a more of an intense cluster of formants in the 2,000 to 4,000 hertz range. So this is an exercise that I teach to my students that uses a very specific progression of we to get a lot of efficiency and easy energy going to get the second and third formant close together, and using the first formant to help really create some easy flow and energy in the voice and encourage balanced registration at the laryngeal level. Then we say we formants 2 and 3 join up, drop down through the spectrum, and when you release that to ah, the third formant flies back up because you've released the retroflex R, and it joins up with the fourth up there and creates a very prominent ringing singer's formant cluster. And even more fun is that the second formant is very strong coming out of this, and it can help lead us to some second resonance strategies, helping us break free of being stuck tracking that first resonance to the second harmonic, which is extremely limiting and not always that efficient. So this is an exercise that I've used to help both classical singers and commercial music singers to find the easy power and ring and clarity in that for classical singers, for treble singers, we might call it the mid-range. For non-treble classical singers, it would be the voce di testa in piena. For my commercial singers, we're usually identifying it as a mixed belt. Although what's interesting is this strategy can really lead us to some of the more earthy, heavier seeming belts, rather than the super bright version that we get from the first resonant second harmonic yell strategy. So I've got some examples here of some students. The recording quality on this isn't amazing, but what I like about these recordings is these are from kind of discovery moments in some lessons when I was first working on this idea. So I've got a couple of different belters in the same range. This first one is a female belter, and working on her C#5 range of belting. So really kind of getting up into the very demanding ranges for belting, and using this exercise. And you can see just before we hit play on this, you can see the very prominent amount of intense harmonics in the 3,000 to 5,000 range, where we get that kind of ringing quality. That little break in the fundamental is just because I was we were doing this with just my computer, and the sound card edited out some of the lower frequencies briefly. So that's unfortunate, but so this is an example of it on we or yeah, good job. Good. Yeah. So, and then a male belter working in the same octave in a similar range on that exercise. Those two singers were able to hit those notes before we started working on this. We'd laid the groundwork for that, but when they had attempted to belt in that range before, and these samples were in their first year of study with me, but when they previously had attempted to belt in that range, it was very pressed and very tiring, very taxing. So it was really fun to find a way to make that range very exciting and intense without having strain or pain or without taxing the voice. So that was a bit about ring. How about pharyngeal twang? And in a pharyngeal twang is, especially when for the way we're using it in this discussion, we're using it to describe or label the extra prominent, or the way of bringing out the harmonics above 5,000 hertz. It's actually, surprisingly, it's not used as much as we might think it is, even in someone who's known to be twangy, like Kristen Chenoweth. She uses it selectively, that very kind of childlike twang voice that she uses, that character sound she uses, that's where she uses pharyngeal twang. And then in a lot of her singing, she actually stays in more of a ringing singer-songwriter cluster strategy without the really strong pharyngeal twang above 5,000 hertz. But that signature character sound she's known for, that's when she adds that pharyngeal narrowing to get all this extra twang. So to set the stage for this, we really need balanced registration and effective glottal adduction. And because when we're dealing with these high frequency harmonics, that's all about efficiency and clarity, and that's adding roughness to the sound. A lot of times we'll mistake those, especially in rock singing, in commercial singing, we'll mistake that auditory roughness for pathology or for torture on the voice or strain on the voice. But really it comes from a very efficient, balanced place where we're taking advantage of that laryngeal registration roadmap rather than fighting against it. When the pharynx narrows, it covers the piriform sinuses, which I am so thankful to Carrie Obert for her amazing work on this and really identifying this very clearly and demonstrating this phenomenon. So when the pharynx covers the piriform sinuses, that's where we get a big boost of the energy above 5,000 hertz. So it's a skillful narrowing of the pharynx instead of a reflexive, constricting pressing of the throat. In my lessons, I find using visual feedback through Voce Vista video to be very helpful because it's hard to feel this stuff. And we don't have a lot of, if any, helpful proprioception of the pharynx. And so for students to be able to see the moments and be able to identify the sounds that have this pharyngeal twang, that'll have a very kind of like auditory buzziness that they'll experience in their bodies as they're making this sound. It's really helpful for them to help to identify, oh, it didn't take a lot of pain and sweat and tears to make that sound. I just have to like get the right balance registration and get the right articulation shape to bring that out. And then as they get the hang of it, then they can track this auditory buzzing. So those high frequency harmonics, as we played earlier in those examples, just has like a very kind of chirpy, like metallic cicadas type sound. And the singers will often experience the sensation of those sounds being located above their palates or behind their nose or in their cheekbones. And sometimes it's tough to kind of separate out the auditory sensation from the physical sensation. It's the same like mechanical vibrations, but we can only feel vibrations up to about 800 hertz, maybe 1,000. We're very sensitive to mechanical vibrations around 250 hertz, but that's middle C. So most of the singing we're talking about for mixed belt takes place above that. And when we're bringing out harmonics that are not the fundamental, we're well above that. So feeling this is actually kind of tricky. It's that energy that we think we feel sometimes, but really there's this trade-off around 750 hertz. So usually that's where we're already talking about the second harmonic is going to be landing there or above. And our perception seems to trade off from a physical tactile experience to an auditory experience. So really kind of teaching this, leading the students to tracking that auditory buzzing is a big part of teaching people how to sing with pharyngeal twang. I also find it's very helpful, instead of just holding our voices to a specific outcome, is to use primal sounds like sobbing and sighing, moaning, grunting, all those, to find different colors in the voice, and especially to find different configurations of the pharynx. And for finding these rougher, auditorily rougher sounds. And so doing things like going through an exercise with sobbing first, then sobbing the text, and then sobbing, singing the text, or moaning or grunting, so that we can find like efficient ways of discovering new colors in each person's voice. One of the things I really like to take advantage of is the way these, we can use speech targets with very specific combinations of vowels and consonants to lead students through big events in the voice. So these are some different phrases that I like to use to help commercial singers navigate the break at E4, going from their chest voice to their upper voice. So on each of these, we're starting below E4 so that our sounds land just below E4, and then we open to the next vowel above the break. So on that first one, a triad starting around like B flat below middle C. And U, the U vowel, kind of encourages the release of that heavy tension or that thick mechanism from below the break. And the takes advantage of how the R moves all the resonances around, and then going into the ah sound to really kind of realize the full effect of that once we get above the break. Same thing with they learn now. Working with these arpeggios, I work from home. I demonstrate these today, but I know I can just talk. That's all I've got today. So I work, so this one starts with the ah, which would kind of give us the extra challenge of going from an open vowel in the lower register, but then using the R to navigate the beginning of the turn, and then an sound right after it so that we're not tracking up a yelly ah vowel above that. And then here, using a couple in a row, he, the E vowel, also encourages a little bit more balanced registration going through that break. He turned around, so that ra, getting used to that movement. And the others are just kind of extensions with that, playing around with different challenges, trying, like here on say, you're still, using the to help set up a I vowel that doesn't feel like it's burning the throat is one of the tougher ones to sing on for a lot of people. And then using patterns that also use an U above the break to help students discover that more balanced registration above. Look what you've done. And then opening to a more open vowel after that to take advantage of that balanced registration that ooh helped them find. And then these descending ones is bringing that balance down from the top to the bottom. What's interesting is as we ascend in pitch as humans, we have a tendency to compress the extrinsic or engage the extrinsic laryngeal muscles on the way up on ascending pitches. And on descending pitch glides, the cricothyroid muscle tends to be a little bit more in control of that pitch change. So that's a huge thing we have to struggle to help our singers overcome, is that tendency to really use an inefficient pressing way on the way up. And how can we help them take advantage of that more efficient intrinsic method that we do kind of naturally on the way down? How can we get that to go on the way up? So these descending arpeggios try to take advantage or set the stage, bring the awareness to that more efficient way that we tend to change pitch on the way down to set up for trying to bring it to on the way up. So who was that dog using that ooh to encourage that upper register, that thinner registration, and then a slightly more open version, though what may come, and then switching off after that. So for what was that, using the and the w to navigate through the break, and then to an open vowel above there. Similar ideas on though you pull me up, using an open vowel on the bottom, then the ooh above to encourage that trade-off into the upper register without pressing up. The other place we can take this, if we have singers who are working on overtone singing, we can use we're to set up overtone singing. And if we just roll back and forth between the E and the we can actually start to bring those out. I don't think I'll be able to do it today, but this is a little visual representation of that. So that's my talk on teaching this. I think we have a little bit of time left for questions, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Chadley. That was so cool. I really wanted to hear what those exercises would sound like, but I'm not gonna make you do.
The overtone one?
Not the overtone, the one with the phrases that you're doing.
I will. I have these recorded on SoundCloud, so I'll email a link that can be sent out.
Perfect.
And all of those are recorded on there. One caveat to that: I mostly teach singers who sing much higher than me, and so I'm not always singing them in the same octave as they're to be sung in.
Yeah.
So they're all meant for that kind of middle voice octave. So don't let that throw you when you hear that. I made that recording for a student who was very used to us being in parallel octaves. But I'll include a link to those pre-recorded, all of those phrases with the primal sounds prompting them on SoundCloud.
That will be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone have questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or write in the chat if you want to ask any questions. I know it was a lot of information. It was really cool just to see the application and understand what you're doing with the R a little deeper. Made a lot of sense right now how that works. And so what I wanted to ask, when you were working on that buzz, the higher frequency, the pharyngeal twang, you're saying a lot of that is related to how we perceive that and how we get used to hearing that buzziness.
Mm-hmm.
So do you use Voce Vista to filter out? And yeah, that's how the singer.
Yep. I watch for moments when they start to hear it, because a lot of times they'll hear it as a problem in their own head. It'll sound metallic and weird, and they'll back away from it. The first time I heard it in my own head when I was a young singer, I thought I had nodes. Because I was like, what's that horrible sound? And then my teacher's like, no, that's your resonance. And now I know, like, well, that's high harmonics being resonated. So yeah, I'll watch for moments when they comment about hearing weird sounds, and then we'll also use Voce Vista Video, so to pull it out of my sound, to pull it out of their favorite singer's sound, and then to pull it out of their own sound, so they can hear the different components of their sound that they'll probably have either a physical or an auditory awareness of.
Brilliant. And that's so cool, because I do get sometimes in lesson, people will say, that's horrible. I'm supposed to sing like that? Like, that's a part of something you're going to use. Do you tend to combine? I know that a lot of times it's confused, but it's very convenient to use a nasal quality for those sounds. Do you?
No, I don't, because I have found that, and I know there's some cool debate happening right now. This idea is being opened up again. Sundberg's looking into this quite a bit for operatic singing. But so this might be a little different what he's saying right now, but in my experience, when we actually sing with nasal airflow, that weakens the effect our articulation has on resonance, because there are no moving parts in your nose, hopefully. And if we're letting a good amount of the air and sound kind of divert through the nasal passage, that's taking away from what's going through the oral cavity. And so it has like this effect of seeming more twangy, but that's really because it's de-emphasizing the lower pure part of the sound. And so the higher ringier part stands out more in comparison. So it doesn't actually make it actually stronger. It just makes it seem a little twangier. Then the other problem is that it really wrecks the strategies that we need to sustain like high mixed belt, because that articulation is not having the effect on the voice that it would if all the airflow and sound was concentrated through the oral cavity. It's bleeding off. It's wasting a whole bunch of the potential energy through the nose. And so what I would always hear over and over is belters using the strategy could just belt like maniacs up to about A flat 4, maybe A, and then die a horrible, torturous death when they tried to go above there. And so I just find it to be a dead end. It's effective for teaching like the easy amateur end of belting, but a complete dead end for trying to teach really powerful belting in the professional range. It can be useful as a character sound. It can be useful in the lower end. It can be useful for like de-emphasizing the interactions of those first resonances with source harmonics, so that you have a smoother transition through the break. But it for really pushing the instrument to where we need to for our professional singers, I feel like it's a dead end. I'm still open to some suggestions about that, but I have not been convinced yet.
Yeah, that's cool. That's an eye-opener for me, because I know in some of the trainings that I've done, a lot of times the access to the twang is done through that in the beginning, and then you get rid of the nasality.
It could be a way to bring people's awareness to that auditory buzz sound. But then once you experience the comfort of not having register breaks because you're singing through your nose, sometimes it's very difficult to go back to closing the velar port. It's so I do use like an open NG sound to work on adduction. So I do use nasal sounds in my instruction, but I want to get rid of all of that as we're going towards the final finished product.
Yeah. And using the R is an excellent way to avoid all the M's and the, I love it. That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
I think everyone's absorbing, so I'm not seeing questions, because I feel like it's a lot to take in for some of us that haven't been, we're just starting to understand how twang is being kind of perceived at this time, at this moment. There's a lot of research going on, thanks to you, thanks to Carrie. We've seen Marcelo yesterday, who talks about the origins of twang and where it comes from, and is it really the right terminology? Like, it's all...
It's tough, because the terminology has all kinds of historical and just daily use connotations to it. I think what's important is the terminology for me is not the important part. What we're trying to describe with the terminology, that's kind of concrete. The terminology is ephemeral and impossible to pin down, and will never be sorted out. Just especially we're coming at this from so many different languages and cultures. The terminology is just never going to be clean. But what is there in the signal that we're trying to describe, that's pretty clear cut. And so as long as we can keep focusing in on what we're actually trying to describe, then the terminology is somewhat interchangeable. That's difficult for communicating these ideas, but as far as our comprehension of it, that's where we should keep striving to really look at what we're trying to describe instead of the words we're using to describe it.
Yeah, and that's where the objectiveness of the Voce Vista is so useful. So good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gemma is asking, what would be your current definition of twang?
Yeah, so for me, and this is not universal by any means, but when I talk about twang, I'm talking about high frequency energy above, so harmonics, prevalent harmonics above 5,000 hertz. So harmonic energy above the singer's formant cluster area. And that's going to add a lot of auditory roughness to the sound. Sundberg often uses twang just to describe the singer's formant cluster. So that term is an issue. And I would distinguish twang from nasality. That twang is not the same thing as actual nasality, though it often sounds like it's coming from the mask.
And so would you say that ring and twang are the same thing, or maybe ring is referring to beneath the 5K hertz, or?
Yeah, I'm taking Ingo Tietz's example for this. So the way I use these terms, I'm using ring to describe that 2,000 to 4,000 bandwidth that our ear canals really resonate strongly, so that we hear those sounds very clearly, and twang to as a label for the energy above 5,000 hertz. That's my preferred usage of them, but I would say that those terms are used interchangeably by some people and in different ways by others. So, but I think it's important that we distinguish somehow between the energy in the spectrum at between 2,000 and 4,000 hertz, and then above 5,000.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that because we're hearing more of that upper harmonic information in contemporary belting and less of that, it doesn't mean that energy isn't there in, say, classical sounds. It's just that our ears are drawn much more dominantly to the...
Yeah, and I think there's some really cool research being done on just how important those harmonic, the acoustic energy above 5,000 is for female classical singers, or treble classical singers, that really, without that information, we have an incomplete picture of the voice, even more so than we would if we took that away from a classical baritone.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amazing. Okay, so again, thank you. That was wonderful. I'm not going to keep you. I know you need to rest as well with your voice. But yeah, that was so good. I'm sure we'll be in touch for some more. And yes, just thank you, and
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. It's no fun being a half voice.
Yeah. Thank you, man.